are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and building a business, and building wealth, all the financial aspects of our lives. So today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite books, one that I think has become, if this is possible, more relevant than when it was written. And the book is called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And it was written in, I want to double check, because I believe it's 2017. Let's see. 2016. I was close. It was written in 2016. And it's hard to read the subtitle, but Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And that I think very well describes what the book is about. So when Cal Newport wrote the book almost 10 years ago, he was dealing with the phenomenon of social media and smartphones and how we're so closely connected with other people that we don't get any or we seem to get, how can I describe this? We don't take the time to do focused, substantial work. So uh, when the book came out, I heard about it. I got it right away, and I was writing my book at the time, which I just recently published on Amazon. Um, and I used Cal Newport's process, if you will, to write my book, because what I found was I really needed to immerse myself in the subject matter of my book. And for a certain amount of time each day. Otherwise, number one, I wasn't going to get the book done, and number two, it wasn't going to be as good enough for what I wanted it to do. Okay. Now, like any book, it's certainly not perfect, but I was looking for a high level of impactfulness from the book, and and that required the kind of deep work that Cal Newport talks about. And so, in today's world, where between podcasts and still social media and the immediacy of connections and ever greater incentives to appear busy, even though we're not really accomplishing anything of any great substance, the while at the same time large language models have come along and are allowing companies to replace the busy work completion function with AIs instead of people. The ability to do deep work, I think, is a more valuable skill than it's ever been before. So as kind of a sidelight, I was listening to a podcast a day or two ago. One of the business podcasts that I listen to, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, one of those. And they were talking about the job market for recent college graduates, and a lot of, or I don't know about a lot, but a number of companies that historically would be hiring new college grads and having them do sort of entry level work decided not to do that this year, because what they found was large language models and automation, AI automation, have become so powerful that they can equip their more senior people with these tools, and they don't need a bunch of entry level people to do the kind of work that the they normally would be hired to do. Now, set aside the question of, okay, but how are they going to develop, a pipeline of new people to, move up the ladder, right? If there is no entry level, then eventually all their people age out, retire, or die, and now there's nobody working there. Setting that problem aside, which could make a whole nother show, it is interesting that we're already starting to see what appears on its face, at least, to be a pretty profound change in employment trends as a result of AI. And so, for younger people coming out of college, I would argue that the ability to do the kind of focused, intensive work that Cal Newport calls deep work is vital to succeeding in the professional and the business world today. So that's why I decided to talk about this book. And as I always do, I will put a link to the book in the show notes, so you'll be able to click through. I use Amazon links. They are paid links. If you actually buy the book, through my link, I think I get 5 cents or something like that. But I would encourage you to get this book and read it. It reads very fast. It's a couple hundred pages, I think. Let me see here. I'll tell you exactly. It is 200 and okay, so it's a little more than 200. It's 263 pages long, but you can see it's a small book. The type font is pretty large. You could probably read this book in, I would think, 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 hours tops. It reads very fast. Cal Newport does a fantastic job about in explaining his message, conveying the information and ideas in the book, and it will be well worth the cost of the book and your time to read it and really make it a part of how you do your work, especially if you are planning to do something like write a book or some other kind of creative endeavor. Even if the creative endeavor, for example, is to put together a marketing plan. Okay, so the kind of focus that it takes to do that well is contained within this idea of deep work. Okay, so I prepared some notes, as I always do, to keep on track here. And so the first of all, I want to talk a little bit more about the core concept of deep work, right? And really, it's professional activities that are performed in a state of distraction free concentration, and it really pushes your cognitive capabilities to their limit. Okay, so you're fiercely focused, I think, is a good way to put it. Okay, you get rid of all distractions. Now, by the way, Cal Newport is not the only one who advocates this. If you've ever read Stephen King's book on writing, I think the book is called On Writing, if I recall. So it's a must read book if you're looking to be a writer. Okay, and he has the same thing where he sets up his writing environment, and it's distraction free. He may have some quiet music playing in the background, but other than that, and it's instrumental music, as I recall. But beyond that, it's a distraction free environment. That's what's necessary to give your mind the space it needs to process the ideas and bring out of you what it is you want on a creative level. Okay, now that's as contrasted with shallow work, okay, which is not cognitively demanding. It's just tasks, busy work that you do, or responding to emails that oftentimes, we perform when we're distracted, which includes meetings. I mean, these days in meetings, I'm surprised sometimes to see people checking their cell phones and that sort of thing. It's like, let's just focus on the meeting, get it done, and then you can go back to checking your cell phone or whatever you're doing on your cell phone, right? But the fact of the matter is, shallow work doesn't produce a whole lot of value. It's deep work that produces value. If you think of any company, okay, the core idea behind that company was derived through deep work. Okay. Now, by the way, deep work does not I think deep work does not necessarily have to be done in an office. Okay. Some of the best deep work I do is when I'm out exercising. I walk. One of the things I do to exercise is I walk, and I put on my Shocks earphones, and I let my mind. I think about an issue that with which I need to deal, and then I let my mind churn on that issue. And interestingly enough, when I'm walking, I'm in a essentially distraction-free environment. Now, I couldn't write a book doing that because I'm walking, but depending on the type of deep work you may need to do, that can change uh, the the nature of the undistracted space. I use that in a relatively broad term, that in which you are going to work. Okay, so why is deep work so valuable? Well, as I said a couple minutes ago, in a society or in an economy that's defined by automation and outsourcing, um, the ability to engage deeply with problems, with um, situations that need to be resolved, and come up with innovative solutions is something that it's, I think, virtually impossible to automate or replace with AI. And so the value in deep work and the ability to do it means that you will always have value from a professional and business standpoint. Okay, so that's number one, right? The ability, the ability to create this high value output means that you are a high value individual from a business and professional perspective. Okay, that's number one. Number two, deep work is rare. Okay, so the typical workplace, I know for me, because so much of my job is coordinating the activities of other people, I'm on my email constantly, responding to people, answering their questions, following up on various things. So to a certain extent, my job is to be connected. Okay. But that connectivity isn't really where my true value is derived. So the true value of the work I do is in problem solving, whether it's working with someone else to come up with a way to solve a problem, or whether it's doing the kind of deep work I need to do to figure something out. Okay. So, but the reality is that, uh, you know, these days, deep work probably comprises maybe 10 to 20% of what I do, whereas shallow work, all of the emails and coordinating and phone calls and filling out forms and that kind of stuff, comprises 80%. Okay. It is, however, the 10 to 20% of deep work that I do that I think is what um, incentivizes people to hire me instead of one of my competitors. Okay. And so the ability to do deep work, I mean, so because deep work is relatively uncommon in the workplace, if you have the ability to do it, again, you have value in the workplace. Okay. And the final, I think the final main argument that Cal Newport makes is that deep work is meaningful. Okay. So, after a day spent, emailing and on phone calls and in meetings, and all that kind of stuff, I'm exhausted. Okay. Um, and probably the only sense of accomplishment I have is that I got through another day. Okay. But on a day where I've done a significant amount of deep work and really come up with a good solution to an issue or situation in which one of my clients is involved, I feel a level of satisfaction that's different than just having gotten through the day. I feel like I've contributed something to people's well-beings, to society sometimes even. Okay? And that's because the kind of deep dive that we take when we do deep work, and the resulting and the results, they even sometimes only in a small way, change really what's going on with us and the people with whom we're interacting or to whom we're responsible. So it's having a real impact. And to make an impact, I think really, um, it 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 it's so attractive to our souls because it's so endemic in who we are as human beings, that the the in the end, the ability to do deep work and the meaning we get from it, I think, is the most profound reason why, you should read Cal Newport's book and adopt his methodologies. Okay, it it will improve the quality of your life. Okay, just in terms of how meaningful it makes your the time you're working, and the kind of and the impact, the positive impact you can have on other people's lives. And so these are the main arguments that Cal Newport makes, and they certainly have played out just like that, in my career. Okay, let's take a quick break. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So, this is People Making Money, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm talking about Cal Newport's outstanding book, Deep Work, and why it's so important and so meaningful for us to know what deep work is and to make it a part of our work day, our professional lives. Okay, so Cal Newport gives 4 rules for deep work. Okay. And rule number 1 is you can hear this coming, right? Work deeply, right? Actually engage in deep work. Okay. So, what does that mean? Okay. So, we want to cultivate the ability to focus intensely by minimizing distractions. Okay. So, um, How do we do that? Well, we can be, quasi monastic, eliminate all shallow work. Now, that would be a goal rather than something we could reasonably expect to accomplish. But that's kind of the that's kind of the idea behind it. And the more that we can the more time we can spend doing deep work, the better we'll get at it. And so the more meaningful our lives will be, the more productive we will be, and the more impact we'll have really on the world. Okay. So another way to approach it is to be bimodal. So alternate between clearly defined periods of deep work and shallow work. Okay, and that's what I did when I was writing my book. I actually put into my calendar scheduled times to do the deep work of writing my book. It was 2 or 3 hours each morning. And I did it in the morning. For me, I'm a morning person. That's when I'm freshest. And so I just blocked out that time on my calendar. No meetings, no phone calls, no email, nothing, none of those things. I just, at the time, I had a sit down desk. I sat at my desk and I focused on my book. Now, I will tell you, sometimes it was frustrating because I would sit there for 2 or 3 hours. And at the end of that time, even if I'd written some stuff, it wasn't of any value. That's just the reality of writing. Okay. But the sort of bimodal strategy, I think, is probably for most of us the most practical strategy. Okay, so he also talks about a strategy like a rhythmic strategy where you actually habituate into your regular routine daily blocks of doing deep work. Now, uh, depending on how regimented you can make your day, that may work, and also depending on what you do. If you need to consistently be doing deep work, so then that might be a strategy that works. And then finally, there's what he calls the journalistic strategy, where you fit deep work whenever it's possible to do so. The challenge with that is, of course, it takes much more self-discipline than uh, one of the other strategies. So I know for me, I don't, I really don't have the self-discipline to switch from shallow work mode to deep work mode, and then sort of bring down the code of silence, so to speak, and do that for a couple of hours or an hour, whatever it is. Okay, but if you have that ability to make that switch and do the kind of intensely focused work that deep work is, so then that might work for you. Okay, so and there are all kinds of tools that you can use to block out the time, to get rid of distractions. Right, we can put our phones on. I know an iPhone, you can put it on deep focus where calls don't come through, text messages don't come through. You can do the same thing on an Apple computer, and on my iMac I can do it, and that way distractions are cut off for a certain period of time. You can schedule that deep focus time. Okay, and then again, you can put in your calendar, actually schedule the time in your calendar to do deep work. Those are the kinds of strategies, okay, that Cal Newport talks about, and they absolutely work. I can tell you from personal experience, they work. Okay, so that's number one, is work deeply. Number two, embrace boredom. Right now, I don't know if you were like me when you were a kid, but I hated being bored when I was a kid. And I'd go to my mom and Mom, I'm bored, And my mother would basically tell me, not my problem, not my circus, not my clown, right? Not my problem that you're bored. You have toys, you have a backyard, you have friends. Go get yourself unbored, right? But the reality is that it's a good thing to be able to be bored and to train our brains to resist distractions. Now, I'll be honest, I have a hard time with this. Okay. Now, my nickname in the Navy, as I've mentioned many times before, is OCD. And so, I always have to be moving a little bit and all that kind of stuff. Right. So, for someone like me to be focused, I think it's more difficult than someone who maybe doesn't have OCD. But the thing about um, embracing boredom is if we let our minds, if we let the distractions of daily life sort of seep out of our minds, it opens them up to being creative, right? The minute if the minute our minds start to calm down, we're checking our phone and getting spun up again. There is no space there for doing deep creative type work. Okay. So we need to habituate ourselves to, if not actually enjoying, embracing boredom, so we give our minds the space they need in order to be creative. So, one of the ways we can do this is, and it's kind of the opposite of what I mentioned before, is rather than scheduling our deep work time, we can schedule our, sort of shallow work or distracted time. We can schedule the time of day that we're going to be on the internet and we're going to be using our phones and all of that. Okay. Now, the fact of the matter is, and you hear about this a lot, the so-called multitasking. Our brains can't actually multitask. When we're doing two things at the same time, what's really happening is our brain is having to move quickly between tasks, but it's not literally focused on two things at the same time. The brain can't do that. Okay. So I wouldn't describe, scheduling shallow time as multitasking time. I would describe it as, this is a time when you're not going to be practicing embracing boredom and working deeply. Okay. And you're allowing yourself a certain amount of time each day to do that, with the idea that the rest of the time you are going to be seeking that if not monastic, that ability to do focused creative work. Okay, so that's number two: embrace boredom. Number three, you can probably hear this one coming: quit social media. Okay, now I am, as much as what I do is on YouTube and it's on LinkedIn and X and Facebook, all this. I am almost never on social media. Okay, I check my Instagram feed in the mornings for maybe about 10 or 15 minutes for business reasons, to see if there's new people I want to follow who are in my profession, new estate planning lawyers or wealth advisors, etc. Um, because eventually I look up their work and seek to make connections with them for our mutual benefit, so we can generate new business opportunities. But beyond that, I'm not on social media. I'm never on social media for personal pleasure, because frankly I get no personal pleasure out of social media. Now, if you do, I mean, I don't understand it, but okay, you do. But what I would encourage you to do is to limit your social media time, because it becomes so all encompassing in people's lives. It drowns out everything else that's important. Um so Cal Newport, he talks about using a craftsman approach to tool selection. So only adopt a tool if its benefits significantly outweigh its drawbacks as you work to achieve your goals or your conditions of satisfaction. Okay. And so that's why I use social media the way I do it. Okay. In that way, it's supporting my business goals, my desire to help other people, to connect with other people in a way that's really meaningful in our lives in an offline way. Okay. Beyond that, though, I don't use social media. Okay. And so that's really the key, I think, here is control social media. Don't let social media control you. Okay. So as part of figuring out your social media use, I think you really need to evaluate these digital tools and seeing how much they support or undermine your ability to do the kind of deep creative work about which Cal Newport writes. Okay, so I think the most important thought on this is don't default to always being connected. Okay, I think that's very negative. Okay, so the default should be to be disconnected and to connect when it will make your life better. So and look, I can appreciate it's difficult to wean yourself off of social media. I will say that the traditional Jewish practice of the Sabbath, which is from sundown Friday until sundown Saturday, we do not use electrical and electronic devices. They can be preset, like timer, like lights on a timer, to sort of do their thing without our involvement. But beyond that, we don't. I don't, turn on the television or the radio or my phone playing, Pandora. I don't drive a car or sit in a car. I don't, watch television, DVDs, any of that stuff. Okay. And you know what? Life is fine. It doesn't come crashing down, interestingly enough. I read a lot of books, and reading a conventional book is very pleasant. Now, I admit it. I'm a little old fashioned. I don't particularly like reading electronic books. I find it very hard to do that. I much prefer to read conventional books. I'll only read. I don't even like particularly to read PDFs, on my computer. I will when I have to, because I don't want to print them out and waste paper. But uh, I would encourage you. You don't have to be, traditionally Jewish to, have a sort of Sabbath-like experience once a week. But you might try that and see how it works, and you might find that you really enjoy being disconnected electronically from the world for a day, because it will sort of force you to go out into the real world, interact with people, and interact with tangible things, like an actual book. Right, you can start it by getting Cal Newport's book and reading it. So okay, so that's number 3: quit social media, or at least tame it. Okay, Cal Newport's rule is to quit social media. I would say maybe think of taming social media, make it work for you as opposed to letting it control you. Okay, finally, number 4, drain the shallows. Okay, that's how Cal Newport describes it, and really what he means is minimize the amount of shallow work you do to make space for doing more deep work. Okay, what is the ideal ratio? That's really going to depend on what you do, right? For me, at least right now, as I said, the ratio is kind of somewhere between 90-10, 80-20. Okay, now maybe over time, as my practice grows, that'll change, and maybe there'll be a time when it's maybe 70-30 or 60-40. Do I anticipate a time when I'll be doing 80% deep work versus 20% shallow work? candidly, no, it's not in the nature of what I do, at least what I do right now. Okay. But, um, you know, depending on how my practice evolves, I could see where the percentage of time that I spend doing deep work would increase. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, if you're in more of a creative profession, and when I say a creative profession, I don't mean just things like, filmmaking, writing, what we think of as being creative, but even, marketing or new product development. These are inherently creative jobs. Okay. And so the more deep work you can do, I think the more successful you will be. So go through a process of minimizing shallow work. Now, I will say that throughout my life, I have sought to minimize shallow work through productivity. So, and technology can be outstanding for doing that, especially things like automation and large language models. They can help us get a lot more shallow work done in a shorter time period. Okay, and then by rather than filling up the time saved with more shallow work, okay, fill it with deep work. Okay, and that is something in which I'm engaged right now. Through I started a new venture a couple of months ago or so called Probate and Trust TV. And so periodically I need to focus on how do I build this, how do I you know how do I bring it to the attention of more people, which is a marketing function, right? So I do take time, over I have taken time over the last couple of months to spend to spend some deep work focused on how I build up that idea. And there are some other things like that I'm working on now as well. Okay, so we could argue whether that's my core work or not. I mean, I look at my work pretty holistically, but that is how I would recommend that you look at your work: is what can you use by way of tools, especially technology, to shrink the amount of shallow work you do, and then where can you replace where can you take the extra time and do deep work that will be of benefit to your career, to your professional life or your business life. Okay. um, So, one of the things that Cal Newport recommends is to schedule every minute of your workday and account for all tasks. And while I was much stricter with this when I first read his book, again, almost 10 years ago now, I'm not as strict with it now in terms of literally putting it into my calendar, but I do keep a pretty strict calendar. And I keep a to-do list. I use Apple reminders, and between those two, I know what needs to be done each day. So whereas before I used to use small notebooks and handwrite it, I found that it just took too much time and it wasn't efficient. So now I use Google Calendar on the one hand and Apple reminders on the other hand, and I've seen a big productivity gain since especially since I started using Apple reminders the beginning of this year in a very strong way, figuring out how to optimize it so that I was being most efficient. So uh, schedule, especially if you find yourself being distracted and not getting things done. The best way to handle that I found is to schedule out your day, literally schedule out every minute of your workday so that okay, at 10 a.m. I'm going to be watching the Way to Wow shows. Okay, I'm kidding, right? But at 10 a.m. I'm going to be doing this task. It's going to take 45 minutes, or I'm going to allot 45 minutes. And then at 10:45, I'm going to go on to the next task. By the way, when you're doing that, make sure that you schedule in there some short breaks. Okay, don't schedule in 8 or 9 hours of deep work and shallow work, and then it's not a sustainable schedule, right? So schedule Schedule in. I mean, I schedule in time to exercise. 6 days a week, I believe. Yeah, 6 days a week I exercise. Okay, that's in my schedule. And people say, "Oh, but you love to exercise." No, I don't. I like to fit in my clothes. Okay, but schedule in exercise. That way, you'll do it. You have an appointment to exercise. There's nothing wrong with that. And if somebody wants to meet with you during your exercise time, you can just tell them, "I have a commitment at that time. I'm not available." Okay, and you don't need to feel guilty for not being available during the time you've scheduled for exercise. That exercise time is one of the things that makes you valuable to the person who wants to meet with you, because it helps you with your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, all of that. Okay, so schedule every minute of your day. And then the final thing is learn to say no more often. A lot of the things that we're asked to do are not things that we're the best person to be doing. Okay. I know it gives, I think, I don't know, a dopamine boost when somebody asks us for something, especially if they're basically saying to us, like, you can really help me and I really need your help, right? Oh, okay. Well, let me get my lance and get on my white charger and, and come riding out as your knight, but the reality is that oftentimes we're not the best person to help someone else, and we'd be much better off cultivating what I did a blog post on this. If you go to my website, you can find it. Just search my website for it. Cultivate a positive no, which I know sounds like a contradiction in terms, but there's a way to say no that's helpful to people. And oftentimes, if I'm not the right person to help them, I'll say, uh, "Look, I can't help you with this. However, I can introduce you to somebody that I think can." Okay, so it's a polite way of saying no. I will tell you, I try to avoid saying no flat out. I don't know, it's against my character as a middle child, whatever the reason may be, right? But there's a way to say no that will actually help the person more than if we say yes. Okay, and that's what that's my own sort of take on Cal Newport's idea that we need to learn to set more. We need to learn to say no more often. We need to set clear expectation, limit the number of meetings, limit the number of emails, all of that kind of stuff. One of the skills that I'm cultivating right now is not responding to every email I get when the email is not just to me. Because what I find is oftentimes someone else will make a response, and it would have either rendered my response unnecessary, or their response is better than the response I could have given. Right. So sometimes I let an email sit unanswered, and depending on the situation, I may respond to it later in the day, or if I get it in the afternoon, respond to it the next morning. Sometimes there are emails I get that I don't respond to at all because, uh, you know, there's no point in responding, basically. Okay. So these are all disciplines that we can develop that will reduce our shallow work, drain the shallows, so to speak, and allow us to do more deep work. Okay. So those are the key ideas that Cal Newport talks about in his book, Deep Work. Again, I recommend it to you as highly as gosh, pretty much any book I've ever recommended it to you. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, there's maybe two or three. Like talent is overrated. Is I think up there with deep work, and oh, gosh, there's another one um, on decision making. Gosh, I can't think if he was. I had the author. He was a guest on my show in the early days of the show. Sorry, I don't remember the name of the book, but those are probably the three and then Charles Duhigg's book on building habits. Those are probably the four best books I've read in from a sort of developing strong habits to support achieving our conditions of satisfaction. So again, get Cal Newport's book, read it. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, all of my social media links will be in the show notes. I do respond to questions on social media. I know I said I don't engage in social media on a personal basis, but when I get questions and comments through LinkedIn or typically they're coming through LinkedIn, it seems these days, and then to a lesser extent Facebook. I do respond to those, but that's because you're asking me to. So, okay. So that's the show for today. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show Jiggers' Place. And we're going to sit back and have a cocktail and talk about film noir. Okay. The gritty, urban based movies where there's a police detective or an individual who's caught up in a crazy situation. And there's usually almost always a femme fatale messing with the guy's head. They're almost always in black and white. And so we're going to have a cocktail and a schmooze as we head into the end of the week. So I hope you'll join me tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific time at Jiggers' Place. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Again, Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And then 1 week from today, I'll be back with the next edition of People Making Money. So thanks again for joining me, especially my live viewers. And, if you know someone you think may benefit from my show, please introduce them to it. I would really appreciate it. A large part of the point of doing this is to help out other people. It's an extension of my time as a chaplain in the United States Navy. So sure appreciate you introducing them to my shows. So again, thanks so much for tuning in and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my Val.